continued its adversarial, bear pit, unarmed political combat throughout the darkest days of the Second World War. Mr. Churchill didn't ask for Parliament to be silenced, for confrontations across the House to be forbidden, when our soldiers were being laid waste in the Norway debate. The House of Commons rose perhaps to its finest 20th century moment. Nobody said our armed forces have suffered a disaster. The House of Commons cannot meet. The clash of ideas cannot be heard. We must muffle the drums and silence ourselves. At Dunkirk, the House clashed without pause. Real war leaders, like Mr. Churchill, understood that the whole point of us being here, the whole point of democracy, the whole point of elections, is that we do not suspend normal political activity. Happily. I have a lot to say, and I may take some time to say it.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. He's missed the rather important point that between 1939 and 1945, general elections were suspended. So democracy was suspended during the war, and his history is faulty.
Actually, there were many by-elections, some of them producing spectacular results, as spectacular as the one in Bradford West just over a year ago. But in any case, is anyone suggesting that an Iron Bevan didn't stand on these benches, lacerating real war leaders about their conduct of the war? The Honourable Gentleman is a scholar and a gentleman. He knows very well the words of Mr. Amory from his side at that darkest hour in the Norway debate, which brought about the defenestration of the Prime Minister and the coming to office of Mr. Churchill, about whom much more later. We did not suspend our democracy in our darkest hours. Why are we suspending it now? It was said from one of the ironclad consensus on the front benches that this was a national funeral. I'm sorry, but it is not a national funeral. You can only have a national funeral where there is a national consensus about the person being buried. And that consensus does not exist in relation to Mrs. Thatcher. And no matter how oft people from the front benches fawn upon her, pour honeyed words upon her, even outside of this house, of course, tell lies about her and her record, that won't change. And the British establishment is making a profound misjudgment here. And the opposition parties, in particular, are making a profound misjudgment. If they imagine that there are not tens of millions of people in the country, all of whom have votes, who are very angry about a whole range of issues that have arisen. And I hope to adumbrate some of them in relation to this motion this evening, Mr. Speaker, with your permission. If I was to speak shortly, it would be that great New York phrase, enough already. We've had enough of this. It's gone on too long, and it's gone too far. And this puts the tin hat on it. The idea that we should suspend a vital part of our democratic process for a party political and private funeral. Don't get me wrong, I won't be demonstrating at the funeral tomorrow. I believe it's wrong to demonstrate at someone's funeral. But I will not agree to suspend our democracy so that some of the friends of the deceased have to make a choice between attending Prime Minister's question time or going to the funeral. And that's a choice that's up to them to make. And of course, it's very clear that they could do both, though they would have tender sensibilities, though they may have, to come into the bear pit immediately on their return to the House. But then that's what they're here for. That's what they were elected to be here for. Harold Wilson, who won 4 general elections and didn't receive a scintilla of the treatment which the British establishment has rolled out for the deceased on this occasion, said that a week was a long time in politics, and this week has been a very long time. We were told at the beginning of the week that it was disrespectful to speak of someone so recently dead. I was told on the BBC yesterday I should hold my peace until Thursday. How much national mourning, without consensus and without justification, are we supposed to observe? You know, Mr. Speaker, how much personal respect I have for you, and so I hope you will accept from me that I mean nothing personal in this point at all. But the decision to muffle Big Ben just after the BBC had muffled Ding Dong summed the whole thing up. It has become farcical. There is no national consensus around the deceased. There was no justification for muffling Big Ben, because that puts the deceased on a par with Mr. Churchill, a very divisive politician. My grandparents helped overturn his car after the count in Dundee in the 1930s when he was thrown out of Parliament in the city. He vowed, I will.
I wish to correct the gentleman. Winston Churchill, then a Liberal MP, was ejected from Dundee in 1922. He served from 1908 to 1922.
Well, it's a very important qualification. He was.
Wish the honourable gentleman to be led away from the path of virtue, that the point may be of interest to scholars, but it is at best tangential to the sittings of the House motion. Mr. George Galloway.
As would have been what I was going to say about Neddy Scrimgeour, the great temperance MP, a man who was Mr. Churchill's partner in the two-member constituency at that time. How we could do with some temperance in the House today, some prohibition in the House today, at least so far as the honourable gentleman for Falkirk is concerned.
I do ask the honourable gentleman, I know he's developing his argument, if he would be good enough to withdraw the reference to an honourable member who's not present and to continue with his main speech.
Withdraw it. It was unworthy, but I do have some history with the honourable gentleman, and hope you'll forgive me, and the House will forgive me for that unworthy detour down Dundee Way. But my point is that Mr. Churchill was a deeply divisive figure, a man who changed sides, ratted, re-ratted, a man who was in Parliament, out of it, back again, a man whose conduct of public affairs was very, very controversial and divisive. But by the time he died, a tiny percentage of the population were churlish enough to imagine that such a man should not be given the full 21-gun treatment, the full gun carriage treatment. Because virtually everybody in this country knows that if it were not for Mr. Churchill, either this Parliament would not exist, or it might be speaking in German. The very existence of the country, I argue, was saved by Mr. Churchill. That makes him worthy of a national funeral. That's what made him, whatever one's point of view, about his domestic politics, deserving of the muffling of the chimes of Big Ben, deserving of the cranes being lowered on the Thames. No such consensus exists. You must know this, Mr. Speaker, about the deceased in this case. In vast tracts of this land, the North, Scotland, the Midlands, South Wales, the industrial areas of this country that were reduced to distressed areas in Mrs. Thatcher's term of office, have never forgiven her, but they're being asked to pay for this funeral. In fact, they're not being asked. They're being told that they must pay for this funeral. Now, the deceased was a great proponent of private enterprise and a great enemy of public expenditure and the role of the state, which she wished to shrink. You were once a devotee of these things yourself, Mr. Speaker, but I think age has brought wisdom in some respects to all of us. But it is an irony, is it not? I mean, as Ken Loach, the great film director, put it, surely we should have put this funeral out to tender to the private sector and invited companies to sponsor it. It's what she would have wanted, surely. It's what she would have wanted. At a time when our pensioners are shivering to death, literally, in a long winter that stretched now into the spring, at a time where we're virtually nationally bankrupt, is it right that the public should be told, not asked but told, that they must pay for a party political funeral? I believe not. And the public have not been consulted about any of this. And if my post bag has any relationship to anyone else's, it must be obvious that a lot of people are very unhappy about and of course they did have one chance. Mr. Speaker, I alluded to it a moment or two ago. They could download Ding Dong, the song from The Wizard of Oz, and they did in very large numbers. And the state broadcaster, which has led the phoning, actually censored the music that the public, with their money, in a decision, a private economic decision that they made. Mrs. Thatcher was a big fan of those. Private economic decision that they made to buy a single was then censored by the state broadcaster.
I was just awaiting the conclusion of the honourable gentleman's sentence, but I struggle to see how what he has just said relates to the terms of the motion, the sittings of the House motion, to which I know it was his intention, and is now his intention, immediately to return. Mr. George Galloway.
Indeed, sir. Of course, the backdrop to this cannot be separated from it. There are many people watching this on the Parliament channel who know what the backdrop to this. Well, honourable gentlemen may laugh, but that's because they're not used to being watched on the Parliament channel. Let me assure them. Perhaps just as well. They can't silence me, Mr. Speaker. Some members are not for turning, and I am one of them. And better men than those have tried to do so. I'm going to be cognizant, but when I'm here, people listen. Unlike some, well, I have a lot of tweets about the speeches that preceded this one, Mr. Speaker. They're not at all complimentary, let me assure you. My point is this, that the backdrop to this is clear, and it's been one thing after another. As Mr. Macmillan said, it's not one damn thing, it's one damn thing after another. It's the state mourning that was effectively declared by the state broadcaster. It's the decision that the government made, I understand. It's even speculated that your office was not wild about the idea to recall Parliament at a vast public expense offering members of Parliament up to £3,700 to fly back from their holidays to attend what was in effect a state eulogy for a party political figure, then fly back at public expense to their holidays. And I hope that IPSA will be releasing the figures of who claimed and what they claimed. This was a grotesque decision, totally unnecessary. Monday was the day when Parliament returned. Monday was the day when people could have made their tributes and paid their tributes and made the points that they wished to make. That was the second problem. The state mourning. The first, the recall, unnecessary recall, fantastically expensive recall of Parliament was the second. The muffling of the chimes of Big Ben was the third. The banning of Ding Dong was the fourth. And now we have this. Now we have this. The shadow leader of the House, rather politely, as is her wont, made the point that there's every belief in this House that this Prime Minister likes to avoid Prime Minister's question time. If he avoids it tomorrow, he will have avoided it for 4 weeks, 4 consecutive weeks. Now, I'm at every Prime Minister's question, so the honourable gentlemen, I must call them, opposite, I caution them again. People are listening to this debate and cackling like hyenas. This Thatcherite chorus over there would be better to show just a touch of sensitivity to the fact that there are millions of people in this country hate Margaret Thatcher and those who followed her. And the Prime Minister, if he dodges Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, will have dodged them for 4 consecutive weeks. Now, as Mr. Wilson said, a week's a long time in politics. 4 weeks is a long time to miss Prime Minister's question, the only mass audience. I'd much prefer to give way to the honourable gentleman than for him to cackle and wobble his ample girth from a sedentary position. I'd much prefer to give way to him.
Point of order. Point of order.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
If you would rule whether such terms of phrase are parliamentary.
The short answer to the honourable gentleman is that what has just been said was distasteful, but it was not disorderly. It does not seem to have evoked any great display of misery on the part of the honourable gentleman, but I know that the honourable member for Bradford West, when he comes to speak, will do so with a degree of calm and measurement of words, for which I know in future years he will want, of course, to be renowned. Mr. Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And now was I under the impression that the honourable gentleman was a great orator. I'm sure the honourable gentleman, in context to his last comments, will agree and congratulate this Prime Minister for making sure that Parliament isn't gone for 4 months, and indeed bringing the House back in September so that he can do those 2 sessions of Prime Minister's questions, which up until recently just didn't happen.
That's actually the best point that the honourable gentleman has made all evening. It just goes to show the points made from one's feet are usually better than points made from a sedentary, indeed relaxed position. It is a fair point that Parliament does not retire for the summer for as long as it did in our long period together, Mr. Speaker, in the House of Commons. But facts are cheels that win a ding, as we say in Scotland. Every Wednesday, the Prime Minister should stand at the dispatch box and face the music of everything that's happened in the previous week. And for 4 weeks, it will have been the case that the Prime Minister has not done so. At a time when the British economy is in desperate trouble, the Prime Minister has not been able to be questioned about it. At a time when a budget has come and gone, which has been near universally regarded, welcomed, my goodness, I don't know where it was welcomed. Certainly not by the financial commentators. Certainly not by the markets. Certainly not by the public. Certainly not by the opinion polls. But the Prime Minister has not been able to be questioned about it. The Prime Minister has not been able to be questioned about anything for 4 weeks. Neither domestic nor international. And our country is involved in very many, and you'll be very happy that I don't seek to dilate upon them, Mr. Speaker, but the country is involved in some very serious matters overseas also, and the Prime Minister has not been able to be questioned about them. And I just feel, and I think that the attendance here this evening indicates that there are many who feel, whether they're on the official opposition or not, there are many who feel that this has all gone too far. That an attempt at canonization of a person around whom there is, I see the Speaker is frowning, I speak as a religious man, I'm not against canonization where it's justified. But there has to be a consensus before one can be canonized. And no such canonization is possible.
From the backbenches, which I think is rather unseemly, and members can't both cavil at what's being said and then make a raucous noise themselves. I simply say to the Honourable Gentleman Member for Bradford West that I wasn't frowning at him, I was listening attentively to him. Mr. George Galloway.
Thank you, sir. The point is that beatification, canonization, is something that can only happen when there is a consensus. There is no such consensus about the former Prime Minister. Yet people are acting, the state is acting, and the state broadcaster and now the parliamentary authorities are asking us to accept things which are too close to royal. You see, Mrs. Thatcher famously had a slightly fraught relationship with the palace, and I can understand why. Mrs. Thatcher may, to many of the honourable gentlemen opposite, have been great, but she was not to up to 60% of the electorate when she was alive, and according to the polls, more than 50% of the people now being polled are against her, were strongly against her, feel that she did bad things here and abroad. And it brings into discredit this kind of funeral, this kind of state occasion, if it's awarded in a way which many people in the country feel is unjustified and feel is being rammed down their throats for partisan reasons and ideological reasons, and for which they're being asked to pay. And I caution, through you, Mr. Speaker, the establishment of which I suspect you're not fully regarded as a member, though you ought to be, because your office is one of the great offices in the land. But I say through you to this establishment that you've gone too far. They have gone too far. There's been too much of this. It's too expensive. It's too elaborate. It's too regal. And many, many people in the country are unhappy about it. And I just feel that to compound all that I've tried to say, to compound it with effectively cancelling a vital part of British political life, would be to compound, to add insult to the injury already suffered. My last point, gentlemen and ladies, although the misbehaviour is coming exclusively from, I think they're called gentlemen, opposite. My point is this, Mr. Speaker, this funeral did not have to be organised so that it would clash with Prime Minister's question time. It could have been held today. It could have been held on Thursday. It could have been held later on Tuesday. The state was vitally involved in the organisation of this funeral. We know that because we're paying for it. The state was vitally involved in the organisation of it, and it was them who organised the clash with Prime Minister's question. So why should the House of Commons be asked to accept the abrogation of its proper role tomorrow, when the government is responsible for bringing about any clash insofar as there is one? But it's too late now to change the time of the funeral. It's not too late for the House to refuse to abandon its responsibilities at Prime Minister's questions. And I hope, if the House divides at the end of the evening on this, as I hope it will, that a decent number of members of Parliament will reflect the feelings of, if not their own constituents, then the tens of millions of constituents of many of us here, and some of them there, who feel that the adoration of the Maggie has gone far enough.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
It's almost like history coming back again. In the mid-70s, I came down on the train and my whip told me that there would be a few tributes to Anthony Eden, and then the House would finish for the day. And I thought, surely that's not fair. We're actually packing up because Anthony Eden, who was living in the Caribbean, had died, and therefore the tributes would be paid, and then the House would finish for the rest of the day. So I had an argument with the Labour whip, and then I went in for the tributes. I'm not so sure I thought at the time it'd be a good idea for me to say anything, because as sure as nightfall a day, I'd not been here very long, and a lot of people were going to make these tributes to Anthony Eden, who some of them had obviously never seen. So it's not as if this thing hasn't happened before. And I actually proclaimed, having been a miner for 20 odd years, I said, when I worked down the pit and somebody died, I said, what happened was that 4 people took him out on a trolley along the rails, and they were allowed to go home, and the rest of the pit continued to work because people like us had managed to secure a tiny agreement with the coal board to get £250 for the miner's widow. And on that basis, the rest of us went to work. Now, what I'm trying to convey is, just like then as now, for the people out there that are having to suffer the austerity and the benefit cuts and the increasing costs for their own funeral, they're the people that concern me, just like in those days of 1975, it was the miners that had left behind to speak for them in Parliament. And I remember then all the Tories walking out the moment I made this kind of criticism. I suppose it's an indication of the split Tory party that some of them are staying today, because they've not followed the leader, and indeed the leader hasn't ordered them out. But that's what it is. Let's not kid ourselves. We're here talking about the thing that we sometimes suggest has gone away. Class. That's what it is. It's about class. And it's about the fact that people out there have to live their lives in a different way, and there's one rule for those at the top and there's another for those at the bottom. It's never changed. I wish it had, but it hasn't. And so when I heard about the chain of events, because that's what it was, it seemed to grow like topsy. First of all, there was going to be some sort of ceremonial funeral. And then the next thing, Mr. Speaker, I have to say it to you. I mean, you tell us that the chimes of Big Ben are going to stop. And then we hear about the fact that we're going to abandon Prime Minister's question time. I mean, what's it all about? That's why the people out there are angry. A lot of them. I'm not suggesting for a minute there's a majority. I never have. But I do believe that this government is out of touch with the people out there. And on a big scale, the people that are suffering in the same week when benefits were cut again. And so I think that we should have a Prime Minister's question time, of course.
Number 13.
He's got number 13. And in the absence of that list, I've got about 15 in my pocket to ask. Of course we should have that. And the people out there would want us to put the case about how they manage to make ends meet. Those people that commit suicide because they're up to their neck in debt, because they've got so many callers knocking on the door. First it's Wonga and then it's God knows how many others. That's what's happening in our society amongst the working class. And I don't think there's any doubt, whatever we think, that Mrs. Thatcher was a divisive character. I am, but I'm not Prime Minister. But I know that there is within a lot of us the desire to fight at the edges, to take extra parliamentary action and all the rest of it and that. What's wrong with that? But let's not give the impression that Margaret Thatcher was different, that she was cool with everybody. She had an agenda that the moment she got in. She actually got in on my birthday. Way back. Yeah, I will. Yeah, give way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to make the point that Baroness Thatcher is actually laid yards away from us in her final night in this palace. And does the honourable member not think that just on this night, when she is only yards away, that in the name of nothing other than good taste, that maybe it might be as well that we called this to an end?
Well, I'm just making a statement about the fact that during the course of her parliamentary time, especially when she was Prime Minister, that she did, first of all, she was divisive in the sense that she got rid of all the wets so that then she can set about her agenda. And there's no question at all about that. I know that's got nothing to do with the question time being abandoned, Mr. Speaker.
Just say to the honourable gentleman that a moment or two ago he was very much on the issue of Prime Minister's questions, and I know that he will wish to return to that. Mr. Dennis Skinner.
But you know, I don't need any lectures from Tories about what they do to Mrs. Thatcher. Because I remember that night and that following day when she stood there. She had not had a night's sleep and she was making the final speech in Parliament. And why was she making the final speech in Parliament? Not because the Labour MPs had put a knife in her back. No question about that. A succession of Tory MPs had gone during the night and said, I don't think you should run again for the second ballot. I mean, that's the truth of it. So whatever I'm saying here today does not compare to the fact that a woman who had won 3 elections in a row then suffered the indignity of being kicked out like a dog in the night by her own members of Parliament. That's the truth of it. And so whatever I say today is minimal as compared to that. So, yes, I'd like to have question time tomorrow, of course. And that's why I'd got a few prepared. So I'll ask the Leader of the House when he winds up, he might answer. One of them undoubtedly is to get rid of the bedroom tax. Yes. I also want to say to him, it wouldn't be a bad idea if we did something about agency workers. There's all this talk about immigration when the real problem in our society The real problem in our society is the fact that now a majority of foreign people that come to this country are now being dictated to by agencies. And it's time we got rid of them. They're undercutting the indigenous workers. I worked with Poles in 1948 down the pit. And why was there no row? Why did nobody get waked up about the displaced persons, the Poles, the Ukrainians? Because they were in the union with us, and they also paid the same wages, and there wasn't an agency in sight. So that's another question that we could have put tomorrow. We could also have put a question about doing something now the country's skint, like we did in 1945. It was caused by that great economic tsunami that swept across the world. And why did it sweep across the world? Because in 1999, Mrs. Thatcher, in one of her last acts, talked about the brave casino economy and the big bang in the city and deregulation. That was the moment it began. We never knew the time when it would turn into a recession, but we knew that somehow or other that system, that social society of instant gratification would cause a recession at some time. And that's when it all began. Just like with the share-owning democracy. We could have discussed that tomorrow. The share-owning democracy, when she sold off all the public utilities, this non-divisive character who said, we'll sell off all the public utilities, gas, electricity and all the rest, and everybody will have shares. You'll buy them off Sid, and you'll be able to be part of that great British share-owning democracy. What happened to that? What happened to the share-owning democracy? EDF is now owned by French Electricity. Aon is owned by German. Scottish Power is owned by Spain's Iberdrola. N-Power is owned by German RWE. Anglia Water has gone to Canada. Thames Water is owned by the Germans.
Order. Can I order? I'm trying to help the honourable gentleman. Order. Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, it's absolutely in order. It's relevant to the motion for the honourable gentleman to refer to matters that, if there were a question session, he would raise. In other words, he can raise the questions, but it's not in order for him also to provide the answers. Mr. Dennis Skinner.
So who owns Orange and Mobile? Have a guess. France and Germany. Who owns Selner O2? Spain. Who owns Arriva buses? German Deutsche Bahn. Yeah, I'll give way.
I thank him for giving way. I'm listening carefully to his diatribe. Carefully to his list of privatised utilities. And I suggest he gets a new researcher, because the EDF stands for Electricité de France, and it's always been French for as long as it exists. And he gets a new researcher, please. And put it out in his memory, not ours.
Yeah, I think he's made his own case. Gatwick's owned by South Korea. Cadbury's is owned by the United States. The M6 toll is owned by Australia's Macquarie Bank. On and on it goes. So we could talk about bringing back the public utilities into public ownership. I mean, the whole concept of Thatcher was to divide and rule. She was also the one that said there's no such thing as society. It's probably the most... Yes, I know you like it. That's why you're a thorn in the side of the leader of the Tory party now. So I'm pleased that you're falling out.
Finish the process.
And so what I'm saying is, it's important to remember that the people out there know where Thatcher stood. They've not forgot. And in those communities where the shipbuilding was destroyed in the early 80s and then in the steel industry at Corby and various other places that were smashed when she brought McGregor in, and then when she brought McGregor back and paid him £1.5 million transfer fee to Lazard's bank in order to shut this head about 20 or 30 pits, and what happened in practice? We had 150 pits at the end of that 1985 pit strike, and by the time Thatcher went, there was only 30 left. That's why people out there are angry, and that's why they demand of us, a few of us, to speak the truth on their behalf. And that's why I'm all in favour of question time, because I've got a list of them that I'd like to ask every single week. So thanks, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the chance to talk about this issue. It's not about personalities, it's about the fact that it's all about class. And we must never forget that. When we hear, we should remember where we come from. And I remember those people. I remember my own family. 9 kids hadn't got 2 halfpennies to rub together. It's still embedded in my soul. And that's why I speak as I do. And I don't want to change. I never will. It won't get my hands on the dispatch box, but that's not a luxury that's ever bothered me. It's important to remember that these words of mine don't come out of my mouth because of envy, because of greed. It's because I believe that we have to look after those people that haven't got 2 halfpennies to rub together. That should be what motivates us every day of the week, including Prime Minister's question time. And when the Labour Party understands that, like we do here today, it'll be better for it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Paul Flynn.
It's a daunting prospect to follow 2 speeches that do great credit to this chamber.
And ring the bells out, ding dong, the merry-o. Sing it high, sing it low, let them know the wicked witch is dead. Ding dong, the witch is dead, witch oh witch, the wicked witch. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. Wake up, you sleepy head, rub your eyes, get out of bed. Wake up, the wicked witch is dead. She's gone where the dumplings go. Below, 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 yo-ho. Let's up and rock and sing, and ring the bells out, ding dong, the merry-o. Sing it high, sing it low, let them know